In the constantly changing world of fundability, the big question is this: how are entrepreneurs and real estate investors like us, ones who want to grow our businesses and who are tired of paying for really expensive alternative lending, how do we tap into the most inexpensive money available and do it without the hassle of typical borrowing? That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answers. Welcome to the Get Fundable podcast with your host, Merrill Chandler.
Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, wherever you are and however you're listening to this. Welcome to the Get Fundable podcast. My name is Merrill Chandler, your host. Now, in this episode, we're going to be doing a deep dive into what is what's the life story of a collection? What is its impact on our fundability, our profiles, collection accounts, how they become a thing, how we can help them go away or cause bureaus to after we audit our profiles, how we can cause the bureaus to possibly remove that. Everything you need to know about collection accounts, the truth, and we're going to bust a few myths out there. That's what's happening in this episode. I pulled out one of my training videos that I done for my team and for clients and for students, and I want to share it with you because when I went through it, I was like, I can't say it any better than this. So when we come back, we'll go straight in to this what I believe is like the final word in collections accounts and their impact on your fundability. So we'll see you in just a second. Let's talk now about how collection accounts work. All right. So there's two types of collection agencies, and this is vital because if you don't know who you're dealing with, you aren't going to know how to act with them. But there can be a collection agency, there can be an attorney who is doing the collecting, or there's a hybrid, and this is the most common, where there are collection agencies with in-house attorneys. The number 3, is the most popular. Now, when it comes to how a collection agency acquires the debt, there are a couple of popular ways. Collection agency has a relationship with the creditor. They're like a single source for the creditor to basically pay a fee, usually a percentage of the collected funds, and they're a captured collection agency, a captured attorney who, I'm picking on American Express tonight. So American Express in a particular region has a particular one or two captured collection agencies, and they give all the business. And there's an API, there's an automatic data processing between their accounts. And so when they send it to collections, they're literally dropping it on the electronic desktop of one of these collection agencies for them to pick up, and they keep a percentage of the collected funds. So that's the first type and both of these types are about the same frequency or popularity. They're both ubiquitous out there in the marketplace. So there is the direct relationship with a creditor that keeps a percentage of the collected funds. The other one is the collection agency purchases a block of debt. Now this debt is this block of debt they buy at a discount, usually 5 to 10% of the face value. Once a creditor has gone through 3 months to 6 months of collection attempts and trying to get the borrower to pay, they sell it off and make money. Now, remember how I said that an account cannot be charged off and collected internally, because you can't say that you lost money and then try and make it. But what they can do is they can now sell that debt to a collection agency, and that becomes a new revenue item, and then they write off the difference. So if they sold a debt for a $50,000 credit card debt for $5,000, they only get to write off $45,000 because they receive revenue of $5,000 for that debt. All right. Usually it's 5 to 10% of the face value. Now, that's how they acquire the debt. But let's talk about how they actually collect the debt. Now, for those people who don't know what they're doing, some people say, all right, yeah, it's a $200 debt, your medical bill or whatever. So we're going to, and people say, oh, it's $200, and then they pay face value. All right. Well, the next one is a payment agreement. Now, they're less likely to settle when you pay a payment agreement because you either get to pay it over time or you get to pay less for it, but all at once. So it's rare. If you're good, be sure and tell your credit advisors if you've been able to do this, because I want to know your secret sauce. But it's rare that you get to say, oh, I owe $10,000. They accept $5,000 and then they pay $500 a month for 10 months. That is very rare. So payment agreements are popular, but you're usually be paying the face value. Now, the next one is that one-time settlement. And remember, they're buying it at 5 to 10%. So if they settle it at 20 to 80%, they're doubling or even 5 timesing their ROI can be 5 to 8 times what they bought it for. So when they say, oh yeah, and they wrangle you hardcore for a 20% or a 30% of the face value settlement, just remember they bought it for 5 to 10%. So a $10,000 note, they probably bought for $500, maybe $1,000. If you offer them 20 thinking you're getting a good deal, which you are, but if they're doubling their money. So remember that in your negotiations. And by the way, all of these things tonight are going to be on your personal optimization plan. They're going to be parsed out next to your trade lines, your collections, and your public record sections of your plan, so that you can use this as a guide. But remember, they're doubling their money, and so remember that as part of your negotiations. All right. Now, part of the collection of the debt, they may threaten if you don't pay the face value, they may say, I'm going to 1099 you for whatever you don't buy. So again, we go to that $10,000 debt. You offer $20,000 or $2,000. They're like, sure, I'll take $2,000, but I'm going to 1099 you for the other 8. Well, that's $8,000 more on your income in your taxes. And if you're at whatever 20 to 30% taxes, then that $8,000, you're going to be paying another $1,500 to $2,000 in taxes. So remember that they may threaten you if you're not paying face value about that 1099. Now I'm going to tell you a secret. Creditors, lenders will send you 1099s, but it is not popular for even the biggest of the collection agencies to send 1099s. Most of the time, I can't say it all the time, most of the time it's a threat, but it's an empty threat because they do not send out 1099s. So remember that in your negotiations. Now, let's talk about kind of the rules of paying a debt off. We've talked about how they collect, but let's talk about the rules of how they would pay the debt, how you would pay the debt. Now, the older the debt is, the lower your settlement can be. And think of it in years in the neighborhood of 10 to 15%. So if it's less than a year old, they're going to probably go down to maybe 80%. If you can get, now depending on the circumstances and the amount, which we'll cover in a minute, depending on the circumstances, they may go 60 to 50, but I'm just telling you guidelines that it's 20-ish% per year. If it's 2 years old, they may go to 60%, 3 years old, 40%, etc. So rarely do they go, unless it's a very large number, rarely do they go more than 20% on a settlement. And I'll show you the example of that in a second. So the older the debt, the lower the settlement. Now, the higher the dollar amount, the lower the settlement. If you owe $100,000 and you offered 10 grand, you're probably going to get it. Now that's only a 10% settlement, but it is a huge windfall for the collection agency, because that collection agency, those larger numbers are where they're in the 5% range that they've picked it up. So if they spent 5 grand on it and they pick up 5 grand, they're making money. So the higher the dollar amount, then the more you can push on the settlement. There's also, and this is the most important thing in payment, guys, is you never want to not include the pay to remove. We want that negative listing. I don't care if it's 6 years old. We want the negative listing removed as part of the settlement. All right. When you're talking to a collection agency, many of them may be aware of FICO 9. Even if they're not, then it's important to run this argument by them, and usually with a supervisor, not somebody on the front lines. FICO 9 does not count any paid collection, period. If it's paid $10,000 or $10, if it's paid, FICO does not count it in their algorithm. FICO 8 does, FICO 9 does not. If it is a medical and unpaid, even if it's $200,000, FICO does not count it. Let me say that again. If it's a medical collection, it does not matter the amount. If it is unpaid, if it's paid, doesn't matter. FICO does not count it. If it's under $100, not a medical, and it's unpaid, FICO doesn't count it. Now let me bracket this for a second. FICO discovered in its algorithm development from version 8 to version 9, found out that there was no material difference in people who were paying all of their bills but couldn't afford to pay their medical bills. All right. So the rich and wealthy, if somebody had a heart surgery and they were making $500,000 a year and they still couldn't pay their $60,000 copay for their heart surgery, they didn't not pay their mortgage and their car and their credit cards. FICO found that medical is a completely off the reservation kind of account. So that's the argument that you make with the collection agency. Look, I know FICO 9 does not report paid collections. I'm happy to pay it. If it's a medical, you can say, hey, I want a really good settlement because FICO doesn't even count it. I've got, this is not doing anything to my credit in FICO 9. Now, between you and I, if somebody's using FICO 542 or FICO 8, it is counting against you. And it's going to take another couple of years for FICO 9 to become the installed base. But we want to push that creditor or that collection agency towards saying, everybody's going to FICO 9 eventually. Could you please do me a solid? I'm happy to pay this, but I want you to remove it completely. FICO doesn't keep it. FICO doesn't count it. I would like for you to remove it so that even cosmetically, my credit report looks amazing. That is the FICO 9 argument. And that is the introduction, the first time besides my own team that I have put that out into the world. It's an amazing argument to make in your settlements. All right. And then finally, here's the exact language. I didn't put quotes here. Here's the exact language I want you to use in a settlement. If it's worth it to you to remove it, it's worth it to me to pay it. And you say that in response to the amount of the settlement, whether you're at 20% or 80%, you're talking about the settlement. If it's worth it to you to remove it, it's worth it to me to pay that 60%. That's the language that you use because you're creating a value proposition for the collection agent, okay? And they get paid commissions based on the amount of money that they make. How much they collect goes directly to their personal bottom line. So if it's worth it, and every collection agency that I've worked with of any note, there are a few that are in the backwaters, but every large collection agency of note actually has a process for petitioning the bureaus to remove the account, to do the pay to remove strategy. All right, so that's our that's our next play. Now, the negative indicators for collection accounts. Now, listen carefully, guys. It is not 7 years from the date of filing. It is 7 years plus 6 months from the date of last delinquency of the original account. If it's a collection agency, if it's a collection account from a gym membership, when was the last day you were late on that gym membership? It could have been 2 years ago. And this account has been sold 3 times. So it's 7 days or 7 years plus 6 months from the date of last delinquency of the original account. So cell phone bills, medical bills, anything, whatever it is, from the date of the last delinquency. That is when it begins. Now, again, the bureaus still round up many times to the 7 years, but that's the statute. Direction for that 90 months from the original account, and it is important to remember that. All right, now what are the legal requirements for somebody? And some of you have we've had what we call the V&V letter, the validate and verify letter, have gone out for many of our clients, right? What it is it's a letter that we give to you to sign and send to a creditor or to a collection agency, that's asking them for their proof of ownership of the right to collect a particular debt. So here's the legal requirements. They have to prove the ownership or that they have been assigned, and it's usually a document that says it's been assigned. Then they have to show proof of a debt collection bond. All right, that is a state or that is a federal debt collection process requirement. Then proof of debt assessment calculation, meaning how did I get the original debt was $2,000? Why are you collecting $3,500 from me? They have to prove how they came to that number. All right. And then there's a payment history from the original creditor. They have to give you a printout of the original creditor's payment history showing, of all things, the date of last delinquency. So it's the entire payment history, but you get to prove the date of last delinquency by the documentation they're supposed to provide. And they're also supposed to provide the name and address of the original creditor. You would not believe when these guys buy, it's not so much the groups that have the API relationship where they send somebody over, send an account over and start collecting, but the ones who buy 500 debts at a time, they don't even know the creditor information. And so you have to have this creditor information for it to be legitimately collectible. And finally, you have to have a copy of the original contract bearing the signature. Now, our V&V letter, this list comes from our validate and verify letter that we would send to you on the collections. Okay. Now, what we want is when we ask for this, they have to either prove it or remove it. That's the language that we want to do in our phone calls when you do a follow-up call. Because remember, we provide the letters, you provide the phone calls. We can't impersonate you. So in this instance, we want all of this documentation, and then they have to prove it or remove it. Okay? Now, those are the legal requirements for being able to collect the debt. But what is the legal process for collecting the debt? Well, first of all, the new debt collector, the collection agency, has to contact you and give 30 days notice to pay it or it will report to your collection. Many of you have received these notices. It has to be a letter. It has to be a letter. Like a phone call does not count. It has to be a letter that says, hey, you have 30 days to prove this isn't yours, or pay it, or we may report it. There's not a single collection agency letter out there that says, or it shall be reported. It says, or we may report it. Okay, so they'll take it seriously and they will report it, but that's what you have to do. So watch the mail, guys. Watch the mail. Some of these things get sent to old addresses, and whether that's a nefarious strategy on their part so they don't have to deal with you and just go directly to a derogatory entry on your credit report, but watch the mail. If you get a collection notice, then notify your credit advisor. They will coach you. They'll probably send you to this section of the presentation to watch it again, but they will coach you on what needs to happen. You have 30 days to either pay it, which means also settle it, or they will report it. Now, the good news is collection agencies only report it once when they list the debt. When they actually publish that they have that debt, that's the only time. So if you remove it, it isn't like reported every 30 days. Collection agencies only report it once. So that good news. Now, collection agencies will also will also call you, but it doesn't replace what's called the actual notice of your debt, which is supposed to be through the mail. These phone calls are going to sometimes, as you know, they're aggressive, and there's certain rules that they have to follow. We're not getting into the depths of that. That's the entire Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. But but if you'd like to know more, you're happy to talk to your credit advisors who are all trained on how to coach you through those phone calls. All right. Usually you can say the best thing to say is, I'm giving you official notice to contact me by written letter only. Then you have to give them your address. Do not give them your PCID. You can give them your home address, or otherwise you do not give them your PCID address, because we want to keep that pure and holy and prepared only for positive accounts reporting to your credit report. A collection is not a positive account, so we give them your home address or whatever other address that you have been using, but not your PCID address. All right. They're also going to send you letters. They don't just send one letter. They may send you numerous letters, but they will always say any information we collect is an attempt to collect a debt. That's language demanded by the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Excuse me, Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. All right. Now, they cannot call at your employment without your employer's permission, and they cannot call family or friends and tell them that they are trying to collect a debt. They can call your family and friends. In fact, most credit applications, like I just went down and, more good news, I just went down and got a Jeep Grand Cherokee. Absolutely amazing vehicle, 2018, so happy about it. But when I filled out the credit application, they asked me for my nearest relative. Well, why would they ask me for my nearest relative? Well, they asked it because they want to know who to call in case I stop paying my thing. Well, I have spectacular credit. I'm not going to stop paying it, but I gave them information that would be more difficult to acquire because my nearest relative is in Arkansas, and etc. They only ask for that information so that they can hunt you down. So fill out your applications wisely. As the good book says, wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove. All right, let's go to the dispute process. With these collections. The dispute process, dispute to see if the evidence of the debt can be removed. Now, people ask us all the time, what do I do with my collection account? Well, first thing you want to do is, if we can delete the evidence of the debt, let's do that, because your score is going to go up, your fundability is going to go up by getting rid of any possible debt collection. So the next one is, if it's deleted, your score and fundability improves, but the debt is eternal. The debt never goes away until it's paid. Somebody may stop collecting it, but it's still out there. All right, and they have the right to contact you at any time. The second thing is to wait and see if the debt is sold and settle it before it re-reports. So we dispute it. Let's say we're lucky and we remove all evidence on all three bureaus of that debt. But it doesn't mean the debt's gone, so it could be sold to a new collection agency, and hopefully we get a letter that says settle it or we're going to report it, and that's when we settle it. Or we can settle the debt now and try to negotiate its deletion by the pay to play strategy. Okay. And then the debt goes away, score and fundability improves. And the other thing that many of you do is don't do anything, and when it falls off, hope it never gets sold. That's the worst possible scenario. So our recommendations are always to do one round of disputes, see what we can remove, and then, and if it's removed, wait for the debt to come back to us and be prepared to settle it and pay it, or settle it now and then negotiate its deletion. Okay. Many times, some of our most successful clients have sought to settle it, and if they say, if you have the resources, settle it, and if they part of the negotiation is if they seek to remove it or say that they'll remove it from the bureaus, then you pay it off. If they say no, we're not going to do it, then we go, we're not going to remove it. Then we go to the number one dispute model and negotiate it later. Okay. All right. Listen carefully. I'm yelling on this slide. Do not pay off your collections without talking to your advisor team first, period. If you could see me now, I'm pounding on my chair. Do not pay off collections without talking to your advisor team first, period. No exceptions, because we want to get the highest yield. So many times people say, oh yeah, I got a windfall. I paid off all my debts. And then they want to be, and then they're wondering why that their score isn't improving.
Thank you for listening to the Get Fundable podcast. Please leave comments because Merrill would love to read about your aha moments from this episode. And be sure to visit getfundable.com to read our blog, get important links, join our community, and much, much more, like ordering Merrill's tell-all book that is changing the world, The New F Word. And you gotta tell your friends about this podcast because we want them to get fundable too.